Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Don't Risk It podcast presented by VFIS Client Risk Solutions. This program focuses on the exposures our clients frequently encounter and discusses some potential solutions to help reduce these exposures. I'm your host, Chris Rodgers with VFIS Client Risk Solutions, and today we're discussing EMS Special Event Standby Agreements. Joining me on the program today is Dave Bradley from the VFIS Client Risk Solutions team, and he's joining us to discuss best practices for EMS Special Standby Events. Dave, I want to thank you for joining me today, and it's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Good to hear. So what are some examples of EMS event standby?
Chris, they can run the gamut, but when you're picturing things that we do as EMS special event standbys, community events, sporting events, any kind of running event, racing event, whether it be bike races or motorized races, fireworks, music concerts, the list could go on and on.
So are there, events where we have people that are dedicated to them, or are there non-dedicated events? Can you kind of describe the difference between those two?
Sure, absolutely. You're going to find organizations that want you there. They want qualified, certified people on site. And those typically we would call dedicated events, where that ambulance crew is committed to that event. Non-dedicated events, and we'll talk about agreements later, but those are where it gets a little gray. Non-dedicated events, hey, we're having a health fair or we're running a 5K. Can the ambulance come by? And having the ambulance there is great, but making sure they understand that you will be leaving for 911 events. So a good delineation of a dedicated event, we're staying, we're not going anywhere. Non-dedicated, we'll be there if we can.
And that's something we should definitely identify beforehand, before that event begins. So do states require pre-planning for larger events?
For the most part, yes. Most states have a requirement depending on the crowd size, and they vary. Some say at 5,000. We've seen ones where at 25,000, you must have an ambulance on site. And as the numbers go up, you have to add more ambulances. You also potentially have to add some kind of structure where people can get under cover. Depending if it's a very large event, you may have a requirement for a physician to be on site. The other things that go into the pre-planning, a process for you to notify people of weather or other unforeseen events. So somebody's monitoring weather, a bad storm's coming in, how much time, how far away is the lightning before you have to let people know. So the best thing to do is look at your state, go to the Department of Health website in your state and see what they require for pre-planning events.
So most of the times whenever EMS encounters a patient, that's due to a call being, 911, however they're brought to the scene. But, at a special event, EMS is there and they could have a patient contact that's kind of outside of the norm. So can you define what truly is a patient contact?
So it's typically state specific, but bottom line is if you're providing any kind of treatment to a person, they become a patient. Things outside of that, you're at a large event and people get blisters when they're outside. Having bandages available, some states allow you to put aspirin or Advil or Tylenol out that people can self-medicate. You also may have an area where you want to have an ability for a diabetic person to be able to check their sugar and or administer medications, a secluded area also for breastfeeding mothers, things like that. But from a patient standpoint, it's a patient who's requiring treatment.
So how does that involve PCRs? If we're having a patient contact, do we do a PCR for everyone, or does it depend on the severity? I know you mentioned a blister or something like that, or obviously something much worse. So where's the line drawn on completing a PCR?
That's a great question. And again, it falls back to your state, but most importantly, a lot of times to your medical director. When I was in EMS leadership and we would have large events, we would have a patient log, really a touch base log. Anybody who came to see us for anything would go on that list, and we would write they took a bandage, or we put a bandage on a blister or something like that, or they came and said, hey, I have a splinter. But if they required specific treatment, we had a PCR with a refusal as appropriate. But you at least got contact information on people that would not be normally considered patients at a special event. And states typically have outlines that say this is what a patient is. This may not be a patient.
So, what are some of the best practices that you suggest? I know earlier that you mentioned standby agreements. Can you elaborate on that and any other best practices that you have in mind?
Sure. So we can talk about a couple things. Absolutely. A signed EMS standby agreement that outlines exactly what the EMS agency is providing. And that can be electronic, but it needs to be acknowledged by both the EMS agency and the agency that's going to receive service. And that document is best used for any time you're doing an EMS standby agreement. So if it's dedicated, absolutely. You list what they're getting, how long there are, if there's any fees, things like that. But on the other side, a non-dedicated event, it helps protect you because you've now told them, yes, you'll be there if you can, but you're not staying there. So they don't turn around when somebody falls and says, where's the ambulance? So you've made it very clear I'm either dedicated or non-dedicated.
How often should we, if we have agreements that are in place with, say, a school district, if there's an annual fair in our area, should we one time and go with that agreement, or should we re-up that each time as the year comes around?
Annually is going to be best practice. Anytime, sports, high school sports, college sports are probably the perfect example. There's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8 games. It could be peewees, midgets, high school, but having that new document every year that says, this is what we're providing, this is what you're getting.
And how do we assure that the EMS crew, understands their role? If they're, do they know, do we obviously let them know if they're dedicated, hey, you got to stay unless we call you off? Kind of how do we deal with internally with our folks to get them to understand the EMS standby role?
Another great question. And, there's so many times there's little, are we supposed to do this? Are we not supposed to do this? So having something clearly written and making sure the crews understand what they're actually contracted for. Take, for example, you're contracted for a game. It doesn't matter what kind of game, hockey game, football, baseball. And are you contracted there for the players and the coaches? Are you contracted for the entire audience? And again, that sounds trivial, but when you think about it, if there's an event up in the stands and you're contracted for the players and the coaches, what do? Do both people go to the medical emergency in the stands? And what happens on the field or on the ice? Do you stop the event? Another option, one person goes up to the medical emergency, another person stays on the ice. But having that all prearranged, both with your crews, but also with the organization that is receiving that service, it's really important. And then a plan for, okay, we now have an emergency. Have we already started another vehicle this direction?
If we're a dedicated unit, we're probably most likely going to call a unit that's off-site to come because we're contractually obligated to stay at that scene unless that contract mentions that in case of certain emergencies, we can leave.
And that's a really good point. You take a serious medical event, cardiac arrest, impending childbirth, something like that. Is there a plan for, okay, we absolutely have to leave right now? The game gets stopped and another vehicle's on its way, just so people, what it comes down to communication, but written communication that everybody understands what they're getting. One last best practice to talk about, Chris, is at large events, especially outside events with seating in the grass, does EMS have access to all parts of the crowd? Are there walking paths? And I'm talking about an event, 40, 50, 60,000 people, an outside concert or something that's not in stands. Because with stands, with seating, you have rows where you walk, but when you're in an outside event, having delineated areas where EMS crews, wide enough for EMS crews to walk that are kept clear, becomes really important when you need to be timely in your response to patients. So having that area pre-dedicated that these are the walking areas and they're never cluttered or people sitting in them.
And if possible, it'd be ideal if we could get in there before the event starts to kind of outline where those routes are, exits, the path of least resistance if we have an emergency to get to where our rig is to get off scene if we need to.
Absolutely, and you just hit on another topic that hadn't even occurred to me. Is it's in my mind, but it wasn't something we were going to talk about. But the egress. How does an ambulance get to the hospital in a crowd of that size? What's their exit route, and is that aligned with what the police are expecting and things like that?
So we often generate resources whenever we have topics like this that are very prevalent in the industry. So can you talk about some resources that VFIS or some other industries or other entities might have to use?
Absolutely. Based on the fact that we see it as a risk, we've got a very nice EMS special event standby agreement. It outlines everything we've talked about. What's beautiful is on the second or on the back or the second page is an actual sample contract you can use for dedicated or non-dedicated. So a lot of the work is already done for you. If you don't have a form in place, this would answer that. The other place I would send people to is their State Bureau of Health Department of EMS. They're going to have resources and expectations for planning special events, especially events of size.
Well, Dave, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program, and I always enjoy your perspective on everything, and you always bring good information. So I did the same thing again today, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Chris. It was great to be here, and always a pleasure.
And I want to thank you for listening to the program and for your interest in VFIS safety resources. I want to thank Dave Bradley once again for his time and information. Please consider subscribing to our program to stay up to date on new content releases. Also, if you like what you've heard, please consider leaving a review below. For more information about the many resources available from VFIS, please visit VFIS.com. And to submit ideas for future discussions, please reach out by emailing VFISriskcontrol@VFIS.com. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day. The views, information, or opinions expressed during this program are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Gladfelter Insurance Group, VFIS, and its employees.